Well, it's taken us a long time to get to this point, but now we really need to turn our attention toward bulking up the database. That is to say, getting all of that data in there. So this video is dedicated to two different techniques of bulk loading. And one of the sticky things we'll see today is working with those primary key, foreign key relationships, building those relationships in the database. So there will be another video later dedicated exclusively to working with those foreign keys. But for today, it's about getting primary entities in, so let's get started. All right, well, the answer to typing those inserts one at a time is to do them en masse. So the first technique that we're going to use today is exactly that. So we are going to create a plain text document full of SQL statements, and we're going to import all of those SQL statements into MySQL. And we're going to do that with the source command. Well, you might remember we've actually done this before. When we loaded Bird Club for the very first time, we did it in exactly this technique. We sourced the entire database of Bird Club. And we're going to do a similar thing today. We're just going to write our own plain text document full of SQL insert statements. I think actually we might create a table too at the same time. And then we're just going to import that into MySQL with the source command. The second technique we're going to do is one that you would do when you bring data into a database from a spreadsheet, for example. So it's very easy to export data from a spreadsheet into what we call comma-separated values. And so if we load a comma-separated values file into MySQL, we use a slightly different command called load data, and we'll do that in the second part of today's lecture. Now, here's what I want to do. We'll use the books database again, but let's just imagine that I'm maybe expanding it. Maybe I'm doing publishers, who knows what. And one of the things that I need is a list of all the U.S. states and their two-letter postal abbreviations. Now, I could sit at the command line and I could type that in one by one, and I could go look at that. But here it is on the web. You can find this in a bajillion different places. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy all of this information and paste it into a plain text document, and then convert that plain text document into a series of SQL insert statements. All right, here in the text editor, I'm just using BBEdit today on my Mac, but you can use any text editor you want to, totally fine. I just pasted all of that information from the website right here. And obviously this looks nothing like SQL right now. And so I've gotten started to do that. I haven't finished yet, so I want to walk through the ending of it. But here's what I've been working on. So one of the things that I did was that I typed out one time the beginning SQL of my insert, and then I just pasted it all the way down. So what I'm going to do, and I haven't even built this yet, I want to have a table called state. Now inside the table called state, I want to have two columns. The first column is going to be ID. And ID is going to contain the two-letter sequence of every state. This is a good example of a primary key that is not a number and is not auto-increment. So it's a string. It's going to be a character 2, but it's going to serve as a primary key. Now the second column is going to be called state, and that's where I'm going to put the name of the state in here. But my data was backwards. Now, I could flip that, I could rearrange it, but that sounds like a lot of work to me. And it seems simpler just to reverse the order of the columns in my insert statement. So that's what I've done. So I typed out insert into state, columns state and ID, values, left parenthesis, and a single quote. And then I pasted that all the way down the document. Now, the other thing that I did, you'll notice, is I saved this. I'm calling it states.sql. And when I appended the .sql extension, the text editor knows that I'm working with SQL, and I get these funky color coding things, which is really great. Now, if it happened to get that wrong, here are all the languages down here that my text editor knows. So I can select any one of these and get color coding. But when I chose .sql, it said, okay, that's SQL generic. There's also SQL, MySQL in here, but it's going to be all the same. Don't worry about it. The color coding will help me. So for example, you'll notice all these strings are pink right now. So if I notice strings later that are not pink, I know I have a mistake. All right, well, let's walk through this some more. So here's what I want to do next. After the word Alabama up here at the top, I need a closing quotation mark, and then I probably need a comma. Oh, I definitely need a comma, and maybe a space if I want to be a little more readable. And then I need an opening quotation mark for the AL. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight the text, and I'm going to do a global replace. So I'm just going to copy that, and then I'm going to go into find. I'm just going to do the keyboard here, Command F. So here's what I want to find. I want to find that combination, which is a space followed by a hyphen followed by a space, and I want to change it. What I want to change it to is a closing quotation mark followed by a comma followed by a space followed by an opening quotation mark. And so I got wrap around here. It doesn't matter, I'm at the top. So I'm just going to click replace all. There you go. It says 50 of them were done. Of course there would be 50 of them because there are 50 states. But you can see I've changed that now. So now I have two strings. The second one's unfinished, but I have two strings. And so all the states have quotation marks after them, followed by a comma, followed by an opening quote. Great. Okay, one more step. If I go under View to Text Display, and everyone's going to be different. If you're in Sublime, for example, you just have to highlight all the text and it'll show. But here in BB Edit, I need to show invisibles. So one of the things you'll see is every space now is a little dot. So I can tell where the spaces are and I can tell how many there are. Now also at the end, there's this little pipe character here. A little elbow, and that elbow signals or signifies the return key or the enter key at the end of the line. And those of you who have done some programming know that this is a new line character. So here's what I would like to do next. I'd like to take every new line character and I would like to replace it with a sequence. That sequence needs to be a quotation mark to end the string, followed by a right parenthesis because I'm in my value list, followed by a semicolon because every SQL statement ends with a semicolon. And then I'd like to put that new line back on there. All right? Okay. So I'm going to go back into find, and here's what I want. Now, most of these have a grep kind of thing. You know, you can copy and paste that end of line. That's a character just like any other. You can copy and paste it. But I've got grep selected here, so I can use some symbols. And the symbol for a new line character is a \n. And we're going to see that here in just a minute. So this is just our first introduction to it. \n is going to be really important in the second half of this lecture. But what I'd like to replace \n with is a closing quotation mark, a right-hand parenthesis, a semicolon, and a new line character. So I'm going to make all of those replacements. I'm just going to click replace all. Look at that. It's great. 50 of those were done. Now it's perfect. So values, left-hand parenthesis, string Alabama, comma, space, string AL, right bracket, semicolon, end of line. Great. So if I just go in, so I go View Text Display, I can hide my invisibles again. There, it looks pretty normal, right? Perfect. All right. So I'm just going to save this. Oh. Crikey, there you go. Save it. All right, that's perfect. Now, I want to do some other things too. Like I don't have the table yet, and I need to make the table. So I could go over to my terminal window and I can make the table. However, I have a couple of things already prepped, as you probably thought that I would, right? All right, so I'm just going to paste this in here. So anything that starts with a double dash is going to be treated as a human readable comment, and MySQL will ignore any line that starts with a double dash. So this is where I can do some human readable comments for myself later. So like here, I'm going to insert all my values. Great. Now, I've also put here a create table sentence. So I'm going to create a table called state. It will have two columns, one ID, one called state. ID is going to be character 2, and that means that every value in that column will be 2 characters long. I don't need it to be a varchar character because it's not going to vary. So why vary it when it isn't gonna. So it's just going to be a character 2. I am not allowing it to be null because that is a characteristic necessary for a primary key, and I am telling MySQL that it is in fact a primary key. You'll notice that it's not an integer and it's not auto increment because it's a string. And then I'm going to put the state in. And I just kind of made an eyeball guess here. I think there's nothing longer than varchar 20 here, but we'll see. And then right-hand parenthesis. So here's what's going to happen. I am going to source this into MySQL, and when that happens, MySQL will start at the top and look at every single line, and if there's an executable statement, like create table, it will execute it. When it gets to insert values, it will just work its way down and it will insert all of the values. Yep. And by the time it finishes, we'll have a table and it'll be populated. Right, here in the terminal window, I have already taken the liberty to change directories into the folder where my documents happen to be. So if I do a directory listing, you can see here's my original one, US states, that's raw. And then here's the one we just finished working on, states.sql. So what I need to do now is get into MySQL. I have a shortcut for that, and you guys don't have it. It's okay. Here I am in MySQL. Now I need to tell MySQL which database I want to use. So I'm going to use books. And if I do show tables, you'll notice there are those 3 tables that we were working on before, book, person, and role. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to source states.sql. So I'm going to type source and a space. Now remember the trick, you can always drag the icon of the document into the terminal window, and that will give you what we call the path to that document. Now, because I took the time to change directories into the folder where states.sql is located, I'm not going to drag it in, and I can just type the name. So I'm going to type states.sql. Now, this is one example of an SQL statement where I don't need a semicolon. You can put it on if you want to, but you don't need to. So what's going to happen is MySQL is going to go out, find that document states.sql, import it, and execute every SQL statement inside the document. Ready? Good. Lots of stuff happened there in a really short amount of time. So if I show tables, now you'll know that there is state. So I can do select star from, I can't spell it, select star from state. There you go. 50 rows, and you can see exactly what's happening, right? So I have the ID column with the 2-letter abbreviation, and then I have the state with all of the names. Exactly. Now if I can do a describe state, and you can see what it looks like. So again, same as we just created. The first column is ID. It is a character 2. That means every element, every data element in that column will always be 2 characters long. Can it be null? Nope. Is it a key? Yeah, primary key. And then we have state, which is a varchar 20. All right. That's it for sourcing. Technique 2, load data. Now, I'm going to be really honest about this one, and I have a bit of a caveat. Historically, this was one of the really, really easy and great ways that we could load spreadsheet data into a database. However, over the past few years, the owners of MySQL, a company called Oracle, have felt that this is a security risk. And I see their point. On a really big production system, sure, I can see people abusing this. But for us, just little tiny researchers, I don't think that this is a big security risk for us. However, they have made it so difficult to do this that, I'll be honest, if I run a Windows machine, I wouldn't even try this anymore. I do think it's possible on a Macintosh, Linux, Unix machine, so I will go through the steps on how to do this. Because so much of our data comes out of spreadsheets, and I understand that. But if I were doing this on a Windows machine, I would probably think about sourcing, like we just saw. And in a future video, I'll talk about Python and using Python with all of this data. So what I would probably do is write a Python script to produce a document that I could source. Yeah, but still, I'm going to go through this just for the people who are willing to go down the path. here's where we're trying to get to, and I'm going to show you how it works first, and then I'm going to show you what you have to do to set it up. So what we do is on the MySQL command line, we just say load some data from a local in file. We give it the file name. We tell it which table to go into, and then we have to tell it how the fields are terminated, or what's the symbol or the character or characters between columns. That's what the fields are. And then we have to tell it how the lines are terminated. And so I'm going to step through this here in just a little bit. That's where we're trying to get to. So let's take a look at a couple of little CSV files, and then we'll come back to this. Here's a little document that I have in Numbers on my Mac. It's just a spreadsheet. And you'll notice that there are 3 columns, a whole bunch of rows here. The first row seems to have city names. The second column seems to have states and provinces. Some of these are null, like London doesn't really have one of those. And then the third column are countries. So let's say that I want to put this and actually a whole bunch of other CSV files into one table in my database. So what I would do is export this, right? So I would export this to a CSV file, or I could export this to a tab separated values file, and then I can work with it in my database. Now, I'm just going to hide that. What that will look like is something like this. Every row is the 3 columns separated by a comma. You'll notice I've put in some null. There will be some nulls. Spreadsheets don't like nulls. They just like empty values. But I've put in null here wherever there isn't a kind of a province. And so this is all in my data. Now, I want to show you a couple of things. Number one is if I go back into View and I go to Text Display, again, if you're in, say, Sublime, you just highlight all the text and you'll see this. Now I can see my invisibles. And so I know that these are commas. There's no spaces in between the commas, and these are those kind of new line characters. But if I scroll all the way down to the bottom, notice what this says. It says it's Windows carriage return line feed. My text editor tells me that, and there are only 3 things that it can be down here. It can be Windows carriage return line feed, or it can be Unix, which is just a line feed, or it can be legacy Mac. Now that's OS 9 and earlier, and I would be very, very surprised if you see one of those. Mac OS 10 and later is the same as Unix. It's going to be a line feed. So we'll talk about what that is here in just a minute. Now, there are a bunch of these documents that are that you've downloaded from eClass. Here's another one. So this is slightly different. You can see that the patterning is slightly different. If I go to text View, Text Display, Show Invisibles, now it's a little different. In BB Edit, now there's a triangle here. And the triangle in BB Edit means tab. There is still this line ending character, but I don't know what it is. Yet if I look down at the bottom, it says that it is Unix line feed. Good. That's good to know. All right. Let's go back and look do a little chalk talk and wrap our heads around this idea. All right, well, here's what those line endings mean. And so you'll notice that there are a couple of different platforms that we can use. And what happens is every time you hit return or enter, depending on what kind of system you're on, it actually becomes different kinds of invisible characters. Now, probably in your whole life using computers up until now, you've never needed to know this. But now you do. So we saw this at the bottom of BB Edit. Again, if you're using Atom or Sublime, it's going to be in a different place, and I'm just going to leave that to you to go look up where you find out these things. Now, when we explain this to MySQL, we give it these symbols. In fact, we've already seen one of them, haven't we? That carriage return line feed, that line feed character is a \n, and sometimes we just call that a new line character. So anything that's produced by Mac OS X or anything that comes from Linux or Unix is going to use \n as the line ending. When we work with Windows, though, we saw that carriage return line feed, that's a \r\n. Now, the reason that we have to tell MySQL that is because it can't deduce that automatically. It'd be great if it could, but it doesn't, so we just have to tell it what it is. How do we find out? We look in our text editor. As long as you have a good programming quality text editor, this is the stuff you can find out. Important. Now, when we looked at those files, we also saw tab characters in there, right? Now in BBEdit, it draws a tab as a triangle, which is kind of goofy and ridiculous. For us, a tab character is going to be a \t. Now remember, we've seen backslashes before when we were inserting stuff. Before, when we used backslashes, we took a meta character, like a quotation mark, and we backslashed it to make it a mere mortal character. Here we're going in the reverse. A lowercase n is just a mere mortal lowercase n until I backslash it, and then it becomes a new line. A t is just a mere mortal t until I backslash it, and then it becomes a superhero tab character. Okay, tabs maybe, superhero maybe a little much, but you see what I mean. All right, so we need to know this because we're going to look in the file, and we're going to find out where there are tabs and what the end of line character happens to be, so that when we tell MySQL, it knows what's coming. Now, here's the syntax for the statement that we're going to use, and it's kind of a long one. We're going to load data, local in file, and then we're going to give MySQL the name of the file that we want it to read. And we're going to tell it to insert all of that data into some table. We're going to have to give it the table name. And here's where those tabs and those line endings come in. So we're going to have to tell it what the field is terminated by, and that means what is the character that goes between the columns. Now we've seen two, haven't we? We've seen commas and we've seen tabs. So we're going to say fields are terminated by either a comma or a tab, depending what's appropriate. In fact, I've got another goofy one that I'm going to show you in a little bit, just to show you that we can do different stuff. And then I'm going to have to tell MySQL what the line ending terminator is. Now that's either going to be Windows \r\n, or for everybody else, it's going to be \n. But MySQL is not going to figure that out for its own, so I'm going to have to tell it that. All right. Now, here's a couple of shortcuts here. If the fields are terminated by a tab, you don't have to tell MySQL. So that's okay. If your lines are terminated by the \n character, you don't have to tell MySQL. So it will assume tabs and it will assume new lines, but otherwise you have to tell it. And in fact, probably just for practice as we're doing this, we will tell MySQL what to do and how to do it, right? Okay. Here we are back in the terminal window. I'm just going to go through and load a few of these files, and then we'll back up and I'll explain what you need to do in order to get in here. You'll see, if you're savvy, you look at the top line here, you can see part of what we're doing. What I'm going to do first, though, is I'm going to create a new database to put all of this stuff in. So I'm going to create a database. I'm just going to call it geo. And then I'm going to put this default char set. All right, char set. There you go. UTF-8 on the end. In fact, I'm going to do multi-byte 4, which is the new fashioned way to do that. And then I'm going to say use geo. And you'll notice there are no tables in here, right? There's nothing there. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to create a table. I'm also going to create the table called geo. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to put an ID column on there right now because I don't have any ID numbers in my CSV files. So I will add a primary key column later with an alter table statement. We'll see that. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to have that lowercase city, and I'm going to make that, I don't know, varchar 40, I guess. I don't know, whatever. And then I'm going to do province. Boy, I'm having a hard time typing, as always. Varchar, let's make that 40 as well. And then we'll have a country, and then make that varchar 40. and close. There we go. There's our table. So if I do describe geo, there's my table. Okay. So here's what I want to do next is I'm going to load in that file. And we've already seen kind of what that looks like, right? It looks like this. So I'm just going to type in load data local in file. And the name of that one is cities underscore windows underscore. I don't know who named this. It was me. I'm going to load that local file into table geo. And now I'm going to say the fields are terminated by, and in that one they're terminated by a comma, right? Let me just do double quotes to make that a little more obvious. I could use singles. So the fields are terminated by a comma, and the lines are terminated by, I'm just going to use singles on this one just to alternate. And remember, you can almost still see it down here. It's Windows carriage return line feed. And what that means is it's terminated by \r \n. Again, I could use double quotes there, and that's fine. Great. So query is okay, 11 rows affected. Now if I do select star from geo, there are my cities, provinces, and countries all lined up. All right, let's do another one. This one was cities.txt, and if you look at it, this is a tab character, so the field terminator is a tab. And if I look down here at the bottom, the line endings are \n. Now we just saw that it's optional to include fields terminated by if it's a tab. So let's leave that part off. And we also learned it's optional to leave off lines terminated by if it's a new line character. So let's try that. So I'm going to do load data local in file. This one is called cities.txt. These should probably all be CSV or TSVs, but well, somebody goofed that up. That was me. Into table geo. Now I'm going to leave off the other two lines because the default tab is okay. The default line is okay. Hey, we get some more. So now let me go back. Oh gosh, this is like start from geo. Now we've got 22 lines, and you can start to see all of what's happening. Now, by the way, when we created this database as Unicode, multi-byte, notice that even the accented characters are okay, right? So that's part of the reason why using Unicode is going to be really great for us. All right, now let me look at a dumber one. Oh, that's a pipe. Let's look at, let's look at this one. Okay, this will be the last one, and then we'll go. My text editor is telling me a couple things. Okay, one is, in this one, for some reason, unbeknownst to us, the people who created this file used a double colon as a field terminator. Okay, that's not standard, but they used it. We can accommodate that. That's fine. So the fields are going to be terminated by : Now let's look down at the bottom to find out what the line ending is. And you can see it's Windows carriage return line feed. Good, that's all we need to know. So let's do it again. Load data local in file. This one is called cities windows.txt. All right, there you go. Load into table geo. Fields terminated by : lines terminated, if you could spell it. I should have used a word like ended. By carriage return line feed. There were 9 in there. So if I do select star from geo, now I've got 31 rows in my set, and you can see that they're all here. So here's, for example, Dallas, Texas, US, which is the first one in that file. So now what I'm starting to do is putting all of these things together. I don't have a primary key yet, and I would like to have a primary key. We haven't done alter table yet, but I'm just going to do it. So I'm going to alter table geo, and I'm going to add column ID. It's going to be a tiny int unsigned, not null, auto increment, primary key. And I need to tell it where to go. If I don't tell it where to go, it's going to go at the end. I can tell it where to go after any column but I want it at the very beginning. So I'm going to tell MySQL to put it first. And then if I do my select star from geo, now you can see I have a primary key column there on the front end. So that's one historically classic way to get data from a spreadsheet or multiple spreadsheets into the database. All right, as mentioned, Oracle is trying to close this door hard, but if you're on Mac or Linux or Unix, there are two things you need to do in order to reopen that door for load data. The first one is that there are a series of global variables that MySQL uses, and the one that we're really interested in here is called local_infile. And so here in the white, you can see how we access that and change it. So I can show variables like infile. That's obviously just an SQL statement. And you'll notice at the top there that local infile is off. So when it's off, I will not be permitted to do load data local infile. So what I do is I set the global variable called local infile to be equal to on, and I can verify that it is on. So now the next time that I log into MySQL, that variable will be on, and so it will I will be half permitted to change files or load data in file. The second thing I need to do then is I need just to get out of MySQL, and I need to log in again. And so you can see here, this is the way that we've been doing it on Mac and Linux anyway, is at the command line you do MySQL -u, log in as the root user, -p says give me my password on the next line. And then I add this flag. It's ~local-infile equals 1. And so what that says is that the client that I'm going to use needs also to allow load data local infile. And so you'll notice I don't get any confirmation of that, but I've just logged in differently. Now, if you're setting up aliases or stuff like that, and you have an alias for getting into MySQL, I do, you might just want to add that to the end, especially if you're going to be working on a project where you're loading tons and tons of CSV files. Now, for Windows, to be honest, I wouldn't even go down this path. I would just create source files like we did at the beginning of this slideshow or the beginning of this lecture, and I would probably learn Python or another scripting language like Perl or Ruby or PHP to help me create those source files, and I would just load my data this way. However, if you want to go down the path a little bit, here's a post on Stack Overflow. I put the link here, and so what you can follow this. It means you have to change the Windows Service Manager, and you have to do some other kind of things under the hood in Windows that, to be honest, I think are going to take you longer than learning Python. So I believe that this load data style of moving data into a database has a limited shelf life. I think, the expiration date on this carton of milk is going to expire pretty quickly if it hasn't already. But I did want to show it to you because if it seems like a viable option for you and you want to take the time to get it set up, I think you can see how easy it is to move data into the database. And that's quite handy and useful for us. All right, well, that's it for load data and sourcing. We will revisit some of these ideas later in a Python lecture, so stay tuned for that. Thanks.